Yeah, my internet's been a little shady too, y'all. So we're just gonna see how this is gonna work out.
I guess everyone.
So
I guess
we are live.
everyone-
Yep, it's 8:02 or 4:02 on your end, I think. All right, so let's see. Let's go.
it's 8 already. Yeah.
I think I'm back. Hopefully, I have no issues here. But if I get cut out, then Jahan will just take it over for me.
Back, guys.
Hear the sound in the back, yeah.
Great. Osaz, how do you say your full name? Because obviously I couldn't do it, but I'll try again.
Okay, so it's Osemudiame. I don't
Okay,
think I can even
okay.
pronounce it right, but it's Osemudiame.
Oh, it froze.
Uh-oh.
Okay. I can't pronounce your name. Boyuan. Is it Boyuan?
That's actually, wow, you pronounced it the Chinese way. That's really impressive.
Okay,
But
John.
I know, John, that was good. I just say Boyuan. That's like the Anglo-sized. It's like the English, whatever, American way that people say it. But just say how you said it. That was great.
Okay. Okay, that's nice. You did lots of Duolingo on. Yeah.
That's your hack. I love it. Whoa. So how many people registered for today?
Well, we had like 120 people.
Oh wow. I thought you were gonna say one. I was like, you know what? Better than 0.
Be real intimate. 120. Yeah. Okay, that's pretty good. That's awesome.
Yeah.
All right, so we're live on YouTube right now.
Okay.
Hi, YouTube.
Is everyone there? Can I start?
We're here. Sure.
Okay, sweet. Hi everyone, how you guys doing? Thanks for joining us on this episode. My name is John Wright. I work as a graphic designer and a web developer. On the flip side, when I'm not designing or developing, I have fun. I get my hands dirty by I get into robotics, VR, and 3D printing. So I'm here with my co-host, Osas, quite an interesting guy.
Yeah. Hi everyone, my name is Osaz, and currently I work as a UX designer at an agency here in Lagos, Nigeria. I'm also community manager at the community we are members of, and it's Sean, and just to learn a whole lot more. Thank you.
Sweet, massive. So today's topic is quite interesting, really. I became a pro overnight. I wake up saying the words as I'm talking to myself. Yeah. It's about designing for cultural diversity. We'll be talking with two amazing ladies,
Yeah.
Boyuan Gao and Jahan Mantin. They are co-founders of Project Inkblot. Project Inkblot, I think I got it. Project Inkblot, yeah. It's a consultancy. They are designers and futurists who partner with companies to build equitable products and services using D4d. I like saying the D4d, the design for diversity. All right, so thank you guys for joining us.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So before we get into the topic, I would like to do some housekeeping. This episode is brought to you by Asha Kotiri. So Asha means culture. It's a word gotten from the Yoruba culture. It's called culture. Then Kotiri means a circle of people with shared interests. It's more like an ethnic group. Yeah. So Asha Kotiri is a Nigerian-based design community that is focused on growing designers who believe good design can change the world. We understand the cross nature of design, and we are big on collaboration, passion for growth, and competence. So yeah, I guess we're getting started. I'm pumped up, really. Yeah. So you guys are diversity on your own, right? I did a little research on you guys, and you guys own the name, the word, the term diversity, your background. Can you please tell us about your background, both of you, and tell us how you came up with Project Inkblot? Any one of you?
About
Really.
an hour and a half.
Yeah. No.
All had to be done.
Like the summary, really.
We'll
Like-
try to summrise. Jahan, do you want to kick it off?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so Boyuan and I met 300 years ago as music.
Perfect. I'm 100 years.
Yeah, we're younger than we look. And we met at a music and culture magazine. And I think that anyone that decides they want to step out and create something on their own, there's like something in them that propels them to do that. If you knew how hard it was, you'd probably think twice, but we were pretty naive and still are in some respects, right? And we decided we wanted to do something on our own. And because we had a publishing background, we created an online magazine, and we focused on creatives, entrepreneurs, social entrepreneurs who were doing really interesting work. And we started that because we saw there were a lot of folks in our own communities who were really mostly people of color, lots of women of color who were doing really great work. And we just didn't feel like they were getting like the shine that we thought they should be getting. And so we wanted to like highlight folks in our community. And we started doing that. And that just led to us exploring and discovering and like starting things. And I know we're talking about design today, and the creative process is also a design process. Yes. And we were and we still are like so fascinated with the creative process. We were like, how do people get things that are in here out into the world? Like, what is the process of getting your ideas out into the world, your designs out into the world? Like, how do people start to do that? And so when we were interviewing folks, we were really interested in people who were trying to make the world a better place, who were using creativity and design in a lot of ways to do so. And that led to us, to speed up the story, right? That led to us doing a lot of consulting work with different organizations. And we fell into this niche where we were creating a lot of programs around women's entrepreneurship. And as we were doing that, we started to see that there were all these things that were missing from the strategic process, the ideation process, developing and designing like an in real life program. There were a lot of things that were missing in terms of racial equity, in terms of like who was getting to be a part of the panel, who the invitees were, and that's all a product of design. And we started doing that work, working with companies, and we were saying that we often were like the cultural bridge. So company, it'd be like, oh, we need more women of color. Can you bring some in? You know what I mean? It was like that kind of work. And we were like community building and creating relationships and doing that. And then it occurred to us that the burden is always on us to do that work. And that it didn't feel like a burden, it was an opportunity. We wanted to bring our people in. But we just were like, actually, everyone can do this, and it will make the outcome better. If you really start to bring in diverse perspectives and expertise and knowledge and wisdom, it creates a better outcome. And we started to see that happening with a lot of the programs we were working on. And that caused us to start to think about what is the process that we're using, and can it be shared so that other people can engage in this process. So that's I'm gonna stop right there. I'm passing it over to Boyuan, and we're just gonna keep going back and forth like this for the rest of the time.
Yeah, and we'll just open it up because we want to have a conversation with y'all as well. But what I'll add is that we are Americans. So we are speaking from a Western context. We are speaking from an American context at that, right? So a couple of things that you mentioned, good design can change the world. We believe that. There's a lot of bad design out there. Right? And so as Jahan mentioned, design, everybody's a designer. Anybody who's creating something that's going to impact other people is designing something. So it doesn't matter if you're in Nigeria, if you're from China, where I'm from, or if you're from America, there are cultural defaults that will impede your ability to create good work, good design, good product services outcomes, right? And so just to add to what Jahan was saying, which is like why we do this work in America in particular, everything is designed around the white male default, right? And so that causes a lot of issues for a lot of people, right? Not just that, let's say advertising, it's mostly centered around skinny, able-bodied white people. But then we look at products and we look at things like self-driving cars that can't detect Black people or melanin, right? So our approach to design is to really shift the mindset and creating opportunities for people to investigate within their own design practices where there are these defaults and what the potential impacts are of them. So we do this with teams, we work with teams, and we primarily work with tech and media companies because they create the biggest products that impact the most amount of people globally. And a lot of it is based on bad design. That's it.
Sheesh. You guys give us the full package, really. I really appreciate that. But bringing all of that to our country, Nigeria, when thinking about this topic, we went through different thought processes. And I don't know, we just thought about cultural diversity. Like, what does it mean? What is cultural diversity? So you guys have done different works on D4d using the framework. Is there a way? What exactly? How can we bring this? How can we design for cultural diversity in this our setting, in this our area? How can we bring the D4d framework and apply it here? I'll give an example. So there were two ladies, right? They had to go to a very far distance to fetch water, right? From the community to another, like let's say to the moon. Yeah, you have to walk to the moon to fetch water and bring it back. Yeah. So anyone that sees it from the outside is going to see that, okay, there's a problem here, right? That, okay, how can they be walking all the way to fetch water? So when problem solvers look at this, they look at it as an opportunity to solve a problem, right? Their mind is focused on solution, problem, solution. So someone decided to build a tank in the community. So we all see that, they solved the problem, right? Everybody's happy, right? That's the view from outside. But apparently, they didn't solve the problem because the ladies were using that time to walk, to talk to their friends, to have fun with their friends, right? They loved walking. And this guy just came to cut that off. The experience just went off in a flame, right? Now you get to spend more time at home with no experience. So how can we bring this in our process while trying to solve problems?
So John, can you just clarify? I just missed my internet shady, so it just cut out a little bit. When you were saying they were walking to,
like, I gave an example of a very far distance. I just said Mars or the moon, anyone, yeah. So this guy when you look at it from outside, right, it looks like, oh, there's a problem. Yeah, there's definitely a problem. But apparently, there was no problem at all. They enjoyed walking. They loved talking to their friends and meeting up with new friends and all that. But someone came to take away the experience.
Because they brought, what did they bring to the place so that they wouldn't have to?
A tank, a bowl, like a pump, so they could pump in the community. Yeah.
Got it. Okay, that's what I missed when the internet went out.
Okay.
Okay,
All
got
right.
it. Yeah. Yeah, I love that example. That is such a great example. I mean, the first thing I would say is I'm just going to reiterate what Boyuan said, right? I'm American. I'm a born and raised New Yorker. I have a very New York perspective. Wherever I'm from, it's live from New York. Okay, so that's like the perspective that I'm bringing that maybe could contribute to this challenge, but I would never rely on me to come in and try to solve a challenge that is so specific to the community that you outlined that I'm not a part of. For me to come in and then say like, you know what, y'all, I got the solution. It's like, who are you? You don't live here. You don't understand the social contracts, the conditions, the right, the environment, the way that people interact, you know, like all of these things play into why we make the decisions we do, why we act on the behavior that we act on. And culture is so nuanced. Like there's so many levels of culture. There are things that are so specific to New York that as someone who is born here and raised here, sometimes it's hard for me to articulate why we might say something a certain way. I have to like think about how to put it into words because it's just something that just like happens or arises. So anyway, the example you give, I love, because that happens all the time, right? People go in to solve something and then create a new problem. And the gap that I really see, and I would love to hear what y'all think, but like the gap that I see in that example is like, why weren't the people that were being impacted the most, in this case, you're talking about women that are walking, right? Why weren't they consulted?
Well, I think it's one of those situations where people are, okay, we are giving impact back. We are like trying to impact a community that we feel like is disadvantaged, and we are providing different amenities for them. Okay, so by default, they have to go all the way to a stream very far off. I think the best idea would be to bring a tap to the community so it's easier. So it's just like an assumption, like anyone needs water, right? But they fail to understand that this was an escape for these women, and many of them actually enjoyed those things because it was also an avenue for them to escape from the chores of home. And a lot of them actually had to go through like domestic abuse and stuff like that. So those were the only times that they had to leave those realities and just go and do something else. So the problem in itself wasn't so much that they were getting water for getting water easier. It was just that, you know what, they didn't consider that there was something else that was in it for them. It wasn't just about the water, it was also about the community that was behind it and the support system that they found in that. So yeah,
ding ding. Absolutely. I mean, I don't know how real I can be on here, but to be real, like our design, what is industry standard for design comes from a Western imperialist perspective. So it doesn't matter that we're not Westerners or we're not Americans or we're not Europeans, we're still adapting these defaults around design. So when John, you're asking about like, what can we bring into our design process? The first thing is like, who are we? Who are we? What are we making assumptions about? There's a whole process around being able to illuminate that before we start coming up with solutions, coming up with ideas for solutions, coming up with ideas for solutions that turn into the strategy and then end up being the thing. And then we just spent all this time and money and we wasted all this time and money. Because at the end of the day, what Jahan and I always say is that if you're a designer, you have both agency and power. So we have to investigate where's our agency and then also where's our power. And are there places where we're imposing our power or our viewpoints on other people? So that's a tool.
Yeah. in your firm, right? You guys work with various companies on using your framework. Do you guys have like an experience applying this framework and on successful firms and firms that they did the UX process, they did all the due diligence, but they still failed? So why did they fail? And yeah, and any one
Well,
of you.
yeah. Well, I just want to go back for a second to that example you gave, because that, I mean, we could spend the whole time just breaking that down.
I know.
Yeah.
I, I just really love that you brought that up, because it's so simple and so complex all at the same time. And I think one of the other things, and happy to answer the question that you just posed, we can talk about all that too. But the other thing is that there's a lot of barriers to doing this type of work because it forces us to slow down. And I know definitely from not just North American or US perspective, but also from like a big city perspective or New York City perspective, you don't slow down, you know? And I know Nigeria is the most populous country on the continent, or like I'm sure there's a lot of movement happening, there's a lot going on. And so there's like this mentality, it's like just go, 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 go all the time. Don't stop. Yeah. And it comes out like in our work. And so having to stop and be intentional and having to stop and be like, am I the expert on this? Is there someone else that I should be building a relationship with within the community that knows something that I don't know because I'm not in that community? It takes humility. It takes being a little bit more slow. It takes putting in some time and effort to build a relationship. And I think for a lot of firms and companies, that feels like, oh, that's just more work. That's just too much work. It is going to be more work in the beginning, but if you start creating that as part of your process and front loading that, it ends up being less work because now you don't have to go and clean up the mistake, you know, and spend all the time trying to reverse the error. And, you know, Boyuan and I and our team, we're not exempt from that. We're not coming from a place of like, oh, we got this down pack. We never make mistakes. It's not true. Like we have to practice our own work on ourselves because left to our own devices, we will be like, okay, jump in, start doing. Like we have to hold ourselves accountable and have our team hold us accountable, or else that's, you know, it won't happen. So like equity, racial equity, all these things we're talking about, they don't happen on their own. Like it has to be intentional and built into the process. The great thing is that designers have processes. We all have processes. Yeah. So when you can't be a designer in bulk and like process. It's like, but you're already using all these different processes. And what a great opportunity to start to like investigate and interrogate your own process and start to identify like, where are these gaps? What can we start to put in and test out and see what difference it makes? But to answer your question, a good example is we worked with this agency and they were an ad agency and they had a brief process. And when they started to outline their brief process, what is that like? If you're being like simplifying it, what does it look like? Oh, potential client goes to the agency. We want this to be created. The researchers, they go off. The strategists start thinking about, okay, let's do some research on this topic, blah, blah, blah. They pass it on to the creative team. Now you have the creative designers, graphic designers, UX, like all those folks like, okay, now how are we gonna build it? And when they broke that process down, they saw, oh, this is where racial bias comes in. This is where it can come in. This is where it can come in. And then they started to go to work on like redesigning what that process could look like. So that's an example. Like there are many more, but we don't know, like as a UX designer, I don't know your exact process, but you know it. And if we were to spend time picking apart, we could find multiple touch points.
The D4d is subset of UX.
So,
It can be used for, it could be used for UX. So D4d is a general design process. It can be used, or framework. It can be used for if you're doing service design. It could be used for if you're curating a program. It could be really adopted to whatever kind of designer you are. But it really is an orientation around our mindsets, how we're thinking about problem solving in general. So it's not specific to UX, but we can have a conversation about how that can be applied to UX, right? So just to make that distinction for the audience, in case people are thinking that we're a UX design firm, and that's not what we are. You know, we're really a consultancy to help companies design better, no matter what area of business we're talking about.
And our design expertise is really like in strategic design, communications design, program design, in real life program design. But I think that's like what's been really invigorating and exciting is like when we're in these different spaces, there's so many ways you can overlay this process. And the other thing we always say is that, you know, we really respect the desire for the solution, because everybody wants the thing that's like, if I press this button, it's all good now, right? I can like figure out cultural strategy, and like, it's like, it doesn't happen like that. And we understand the desire for the solution, but the framework is a way to frame how you start solving these challenges. So the example you gave earlier, I'm going to keep going back to that, John, the example you gave earlier, if we were applying our framework at a very high level, just asking critical questions, not even getting to like the design thinking strategy and the tools and mapping it all out with your team, we would be looking at, okay, who, like as Boyuan said, who are we on our team? Like, instead of how might we solve this, before that, who are we? If Boyuan and I were coming in on a team, we'd first of all be like, okay, so none of us are from this community. So right away, we need to think about who do we need to partner with, right? That's one thing. We'd be thinking about who are we including in this approach, and who are we excluding? Start to map out who are we leaving out. We would start thinking about what could go wrong. We could generate a bunch of solutions, but like, what could go wrong? What could be an unintended negative consequence of what we're building, and on who, on which community? We'd be thinking about, are we going to the source? The source is the community that's most impacted. So in this case, it'd be the women in the community. Like, are we going to them? Are they centered? Are they actually leading the design of the solution? And we'd be thinking about how can we create or generate an equitable partnership with this community of women, where it's not like, oh, we'll ask you once and then we'll never talk to you again, but like throughout the whole design process, you are a part of that process because we respect your leadership and your expertise. And the solution that you gave, that this person thought of, that couldn't have happened if we were doing all of those things, because we would have found out so early on that social interaction, long walks with your friends, domestic abuse or violence in the home, that all of these things play into why these walks are so meaningful. We would have found out so early on, like, we don't want the walks to be taken away. And then we would have been thinking of, okay, what's another solution here?
Yeah, actually, yeah.
All right, I think,
okay.
Yeah, before we go on, I think one thing we may have overlooked, and maybe we had the assumption that many other people would understand that, but one thing I'm learning is that we need to really define things, because a lot of times we think we understand what some definitions are, but we don't really. And really, I would just like you both to share your ideas on what you've learned from your experience and what it means to really design for cultural diversity. Like, how would you define it?
Yeah, well, thanks for that question. One thing that I'm already seeing in this conversation is that we have cultural defaults. Jahan and I are speaking as Americans. We're saying words like equity. We're not sure that you use that term in the same way. We're not sure that diversity is defined in the same way. So, yeah, thanks. I appreciate that question, because I was just checking myself for a second. I'm like, oh, maybe y'all don't say people of color everywhere. You know what I'm saying? So I'll just kind of break that down. So again, coming from the American context, right? The biggest issue that we're dealing with, if you watch international news and you see what the hell is happening over here in the US, one of the biggest historical issues is around racism, structural racism, you know, more so than just individual racism. It's not just how people treat each other, but it's these systems in place that have it so it's not a level playing field. And because we're such a diverse community of people in the US, people from all over the world, right? Whereas like Nigeria or China, where I'm from, or wherever, is much more homogenous. It's like racially, there's not that big of a difference. Maybe tribally there is, or, you know, there are other distinctions. But in the US, race is a really big signifier of what diversity is. So for us, diversity is just plurality. It's all the different types of people that make up the composition of, let's say, your design team, or even who's on this call. It's just the composition of who is here is how we define diversity. Inclusion is, are people who are most misrepresented, folks who have the least decision-making power and structural power, right? Do folks like us start to experience themselves as decision makers and leaders? Are we regarded as such? That's our definition of inclusion. And equity is an interesting concept. This is really what our design process is all about. Equity is, so there's a difference how we define equality from equity. So equality is like, we're going through a global pandemic in the US, everybody gets $1,200, right? That's equality. Everybody gets $1,200, but some people are homeless. Some people have extenuating circumstances where $1,200 is not even going to pay the bills. Other people are billionaires, so that $1,200 means something different. So equity for us is designing a process such that people who are most impacted by structural disempowerment, right, start to get specific solutions designed for them such that we can start to have a equal playing field. And then we can start moving in a direction in the world where we're actually designing solutions that are good for all people, not just some people, but for all people, right? So thank you for asking the question about definitions, because, you know, we want to make sure we're all saying the same thing. And then for us, we use the term people of color in the US to describe basically anybody who isn't white, right? That's just, so Design for Diversity really is a framework to start to address racial inequity, but to bring it into other cultures and other circumstances where maybe race is not the biggest issue in terms of inequity, you can still use Design for Diversity. Cultural strategy is around how do you make sense of all of these nuances that we just spoke of, again, going back to John's example, right? All of those nuances, language nuances in terms of hyperlocal situations and circumstances, right? All of these things, it's having the ability to understand and listen to all of these nuances to then start to create solutions. And so, you know, I want to bring up, when we had our first call with Caleb, he mentioned that he's from the Igbo tribe, right? And so he's like, we're a very industrial type of people. So like, we're creating solutions that are industrial. And sometimes the default there is not thinking about the human to human interactions, like the human centeredness. It's about the function of the tool rather than how it's going to impact us emotionally or otherwise, right? So I just wanted to bring that up as like, we all have these cultural defaults, and to make better design, it's to be able to illuminate what those defaults are and start to design in a way that's more expansive is really the opportunity.
Oh, thank you. Your impersonation of Caleb was quite interesting, and I never knew you could do that, like the industrialization thing. It's quite interesting.
Can I ask y'all so this is like fascinating to us because this is like new for us. Like we're always speaking in a very American context. And even when like we've had some conversations with folks who are like, oh, come to the UK to do something. But it's like, but you can't say people of color because that isn't, they don't use that term. And like my sister was going to school in London for a while and she's like, oh yeah, you can't say people of color. It's like offensive. You know, you have to say this. Or like, there's just all these different things that like, I don't know. You know what I mean? Like, I'm totally ignorant to that. So we've talked internally about like, well, if we do this work in another country, what translates, what doesn't translate, or like all these things. So it's fascinating being in this conversation with y'all, but I would love to know from y'all, like, what are some cultural defaults that you see or notice within different groups of folks like in your own community?
Well, at your end, you guys, they call people of color, right? We call people without color, the white people, we call them white people, really. Like, oh, okay, that guy is Chinese. Oh, that guy's white, right? So we say how it is.
I love it.
Right? We say how it is.
Everyone else is white.
Yeah, like you're white. Oh, okay. He's not white. He's Chinese. He's Lebanese. So, and I stay in a place where everyone from different cultural backgrounds they converge. Lagos is like, I think is the most popular city in Africa, I think. Yeah. So
West
your
Africa.
neighbors can be Ghanaian, can be Jamaican. So it's crazy. Yeah. Cultural defaults.
And if you're coming together with different folks from different backgrounds in your own design practice, how do you see those defaults or differences? Like, does that impact how you design, or do you see these things come up?
Well, I think one thing to be considered too is that just like he said, we live in Lagos. Lagos is like a melting pot of different cultures, of different people. So people in Lagos might be more understanding. Like we might not experience those biases, like generally, but probably if you go to other states, it might not be the same thing. It's actually really funny that we're talking about the same country too, and then we are supposedly homogeneous, but we even have our own differences. But there can be really like tribal. I don't want to say maybe stereotypes around certain people from different tribes. Just like you mentioned, Igbo people are seen as more industrious. They are everywhere. Like if you go to every major market, the Igbo people are there. They can sell anything. Like they're really good at that, right? And then otherwise you have the Yoruba people who are, and again, these are like just the three major tribes we are talking about. We have over 300 plus. I don't even think I know up to 20 or 10 off my head. But like, so the Yoruba people might be considered more when it comes to education and some things like that. They have a lot of people who are into education and stuff. When it comes to the Northerners, maybe Hausas, people up north, and they are considered more handy. They are considered strong. When they have to do with like handiwork, those guys are always in for those things. So a lot of times when you're in a city like Lagos, you may not, and when you design, a lot of the design we do when it comes to physical products, they might not really consider those people who aren't educated or on the kind of plane that we are on. So yeah, that's just off my head what I can think of. I don't know if John wants to add any other thing.
I would like to ask them, have you guys ever created a team or worked with a team that's designed against stereotypes, like against defaults? Have you guys ever done any project that designed against defaults?
That's our whole job. That's our whole job. Well, really, right? Like cultural defaults are stereotypes. Stereotypes, you know, some of them are benign, or not benign, but some of them are like a little bit ouch, but some of them are really could kill people, you know, so there's a whole spectrum there. I don't know, Jahan, do you want to share some other examples?
cultural defaults in general, or
of work, like maybe one of the crowdfunding platforms. Just like looking at what the cultural defaults were.
Oh, yes. There was a crowdfunding platform we had worked with, and okay, so this is what we tend to do, designers, right? We're like, I want to create something, and it's for everyone, but really, it's not for everyone. It's for who we're building it for, and there are defaults that are embedded in that, and we don't even see it. So it's particularly this crowdfunding platform, you know, the intention was like, this is for everyone who wants to start a project and have it be funded by their communities, et cetera. But really what was created was a platform that really was very successful mostly if you were white and wealthy. And so when you really break down, and the intention was really good, like the intention was actually a beautiful intention, and lots of people benefited from it and continue to benefit, but it's just not like an equal playing field. You know, if I'm going to create a project and I'm putting it on this crowdfunding platform, but wealth disparities, for example, in the US between white folks and people of color or Black folks because of like generational wealth disparities. Like I can't go to my community and be like, hey, can you all put like, you know, $1,000 towards this project? They're gonna be like, no. You know what I mean? Whereas if I come from a wealthy family or my community has a lot of money and I'm creating this project and getting it funded, well, my chances of success go up considerably. Or because, again, speaking from a US perspective, because the country's so segregated, you know, white folks tend to have friends who are white, you know, and all like, we're not in really integrated country in a lot of ways. So it's like, if I am white and I have access to more networks and money, et cetera, and I go to my community and my community is mostly white because segregation and like all those things, of course, you're gonna see a higher rate of success with white folks who wanna get funded. But I think the takeaway there is like, we often come away thinking that our intention is good and that's enough. And sometimes the intention doesn't match up with the impact. And another thing I would say specifically to your question, John, is like we had worked on a program and it was for women entrepreneurs. But the default was that women entrepreneurs like look a certain way and have a certain background. And when I say that, they're like white and they have money and they have husbands who have money and they're going on and they're starting like a business. So when like you go to these events, it's like the lineup, the speakers, the marketing, the workshops that they had available for these women entrepreneurs. It was like the same thing over and over again. And then Boyuan and I would look around and we knew our community of women, you know, who were entrepreneurs. And we were like, they don't all look like what's on this stage. Like, this is not actually accurate. And actually, the fastest growing group of entrepreneurs in the US are low income women, immigrant women, and women of color. Together make up the fastest growing group. So from our perspective, those people should really be centered or really brought in a powerful way. So it was like bringing that awareness to folks and then like designing for that. That's some of the work that we did. That's just an example of a client we worked with. And it really made a difference. It made a huge difference in the actual event and the success of it and the people who showed up and the value they received. So, you know, again, we always go back to, it's not just about doing like the right thing. Like, oh, this is the right thing to do. It's like, I think as designers, you want to create the best thing you can create. You want it to be awesome. You want it to be effective. You want it to be valuable. And when you're bringing in diverse leadership, it can contribute to that.
So, for me, so for everyone that is joining us right now, we're talking about designing for cultural diversity. And we are talking about Project Inkblot's, we are talking with Project Inkblot's finest, Jahan and Boyuan. I think I got it again. I think my Mandarin is getting.
You got it. You got it. Yeah.
So most people may be thinking about, okay, where can they, why do we need to know about, okay, designing for cultural diversity? Like, what's the need? I just learned UX on Coursera on Udacity. I want to be a UX designer. I want to be a designer. I just want to solve problems, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I have an example, really. I have an example that I would love to share. It's an example. I have to share it because I learned it. I watched the movie. So yeah, I took a master class on self-entrepreneurship. It was hosted by Sarah Blakely. She's the CEO of Spanx, founder. Yeah. So the idea about Spanx was that she was uncomfortable, right? She wore dresses that showed her underwear line, and she was uncomfortable. Everyone looking, she was really uncomfortable, right? So she decided to solve a problem by cutting out pantyhose, making them short so they could cover on underwear lines. So she thought about it like, she's definitely a woman. Yeah, like if she is going through this, millions of women would be going through the same thing. So she decided to like start a business on it. Fast forward, it's a very long story. So she found out that the people making these undergarments and the clothes were men. They are making things that they've never used and they will never use. They're making things on what they just feel, okay, you guys just want to cover your body. Okay, take this to cover your body, right? So that's an example of this whole topic that we're talking about. So she decided to make a first prototype, and it was terrible, really, because so many things went wrong with the products. They used all this plastic models to size the product small, medium, large. So she took one, she wore it. It was messed up. It was tight, the texture, everything. And she asked them why. They were like, that's how they'll be doing it for like 100 years. That's why it must be different, right? I'm like, okay. So she decided to like iterate because in this process, in the designing for cultural diversity, I think you can't just go straight to solution. You have to like iterate. Yeah, you guys are looking at me. I learned a lot about this overnight, right? So she decided to take these products to real women to test them, to try them on, right? So from there, they were giving her feedbacks, and she was using her feedbacks to make the products better. And apparently, I think she's a billionaire. I don't know. Yeah. So, are there advantages of doing this, using this process? I think it's a process, right? This designing for diversity, for cultural diversity is a process. So, are there advantages to using this when you are trying to design a product, or is it compulsory? Like, why do I need to do it? Right? Like, I can just follow my normal way because, yeah, I don't know how people make products in Nigeria, but everyone has the mindset of move fast and break things. Really, like, okay, move fast. Let's just get this out. I don't know. I'm sorry for generalizing, but that's the mindset I learned. Okay, make this thing. I just put it out and from there start. Right. So that's my question.
Yeah, well, you mentioned it's a mindset. It is a mindset.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
So move fast, break things is a mindset. And
It's
I don't know
also
if
the
you're on
whitest
Facebook.
mindset ever.
Right. I don't know if you're on Facebook. I personally, whatever, I'm not going to go there because we're on YouTube right now. But if you look at any of these big tech companies, there are repercussions to move fast, break things that we're seeing in real time now, right? So if you're saying, is there a benefit to designing for diversity? And you also mentioned that, sorry, what was her name again? Sarah
Sarah
Blakely.
Blakely.
Yeah.
She's a billionaire. She's a billionaire. Why? Because she went to the source. She went to the source of women who are using this product, right? So she wasn't creating based on assumptions. She was creating it based on her own need. And then she verified the need through going directly to the source. So as Jahan said, going to the source is the fourth phase of design for diversity. It is a mindset. They're principles for work, and it's also a framework for working. So we're dealing with mindset, we're dealing with how we work, and we're also dealing with the tools in which we work, right? And so are there benefits? Sarah Blakely is a billionaire. Mark Zuckerberg, on the other hand, is testifying in Congress right now, dealing with all the repercussions of stealing elections, this thing, that thing, misinformation, yada, yada, yada. And that's really what we want to impress upon you as well as designers, is that going back to what Jahan said about intent versus impact, our intention is not our impact. So to even have a stage in our design process where we're looking at, right, we're investigating what could go wrong and on whom, that is not going to take a whole lot of time, but it could prevent some really bad things from happening. And going back to the water pump example in the very beginning, you know, that story is like the designer who designed that, right? There are repercussions. There's a personal impact on them as a designer. There's an impact on the team who designed that solution. There's an impact on the women who, you know, needed the ability to walk and collect water, and now this interrupted their flow, their daily lifestyle. And then there's a greater impact. And again, this goes back to this Western imperialist way of approaching problem solving, which is what our entire framework is designing against. So that's the benefit to doing this work.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. But I've noticed that if you or when you make these products without using this mindset, the people you make these products for, uh, most of them don't complain. They just learn to live with it. Do you know why that is? Like, if you make, okay, I need to send money from Lagos to New York and make a fintech application, right? And I it's just based on naira and dollars, right? And I am Ghanaian, and that's the only application I see. How can I send this money? So that means I have to convert my money to naira, or like most people live with these problems. They just tend to just like, okay, okay, but then I have to now do this and do this and do this, right? I don't know why that is really. I really don't know why. And I think bringing Spanx in this conversation, I think she was like most people until she decided to just make a move, probably. I think, yeah, yeah. So this is a very interesting question. Um, when you have an idea, uh, what is the first thing you think about? But do you think about, okay, I need a a UI guy, I need a web guy, I need this. Just come and make my stuff and let me sell. Is that the first thing you think about when you are trying to design a product?
The first thing that we think about is, who is this for?
Okay.
And beyond that, who are we doing this with? Who are we going to build this with?
Okay.
And what is the benefit to the people we're trying to reach? And the people we're trying to reach, are any of them on our team? Oh, they're not. Or yes, they are. Or yes, one. but that's only one perspective. So like our team, we have, if I'm thinking of like, well, if we're specifically going to a company and we're speaking with the Black folks that are there, and we're trying to get a sense of some of the challenges they've been dealing with, and et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, we have Black folks on our team, but we're also designing with them. We're getting so deep into like, what are the challenges you're faced with? Because, we're going to go and work with let's say your leadership team, and they're mostly white. So we want to make sure that we're meeting your needs when we're speaking to these folks, right? We want to see where the gaps are. We want to see where there's overlap. So we're constantly thinking about who do we need to bring in and build with that is directly impacted by the challenge at hand. So like the fact that move fast and break things is like a way of, you're saying is like a way of working where you are, and that's certainly a way of working here. It is the most white man, colonialist, imperialist way of working. You know what I mean? Like ever. It's like it's been moving fast and breaking things since the world came to be. Like, you know what I mean? Well, not really, but you know what I'm saying? If I'm thinking about the United States, I'm like, wow, moving fast and breaking things cause a lot of problems, right? And I understand, like I get the ethos of that way of thinking, where it's like build something, and if you break it, if you make a mistake, you can learn from it. That's great. That's a great thing. How else do you learn until you start doing? But I don't think it has to be. It's not like one or the other. It's not like go hard, break everything, make a mess, and clean it up afterwards. It's like, okay, you can still do something and practice and also be intentional, and think and be thoughtful. Put some thought into it. So John, I'm sorry, but you started us off with that example with the water pump. We're going to be using that forever now. Okay. But you know what I mean? It's like, if we were all of us coming together to be like, oh, we see there's a challenge here. The first thing we would do is think, okay, who's impacted the most by this? Okay, it's the women who are walking to this water pump.
Right. And the other thing that I would add, there's Jahan's mom. Hi, Jahan.
My mom in the background.
Okay. I know that we're wrapping, but the second thing that we would do is to ensure, this is going back to the money transfer example that you just gave, right? Are you addressing a root cause, or are you just creating a solution that is a Band-Aid, right? Because eventually, why do people tolerate things that only kind of work for them? They'll tolerate it until they can't tolerate it anymore. And one good example of that is like COVID happening in the US, and now everybody's on unemployment, but these unemployment systems are not working. They've been working for decades now, but now because such an influx of people need this, these systems, then they're on overdrive and people aren't getting their money, and then there's a lot of efficiencies. So they're only working until they don't work anymore if they're not addressing the root cause to begin with.
And I would also add that when we go back to the water pump and you laid out that challenge, the challenge looks like, oh, women are walking too far to get water. We should bring water to them so they don't have to walk. But based on some of the information that you provided, the root cause is, why is there a culture where domestic abuse and violence has women having to escape their home to walk, to get out of that situation? Why does the culture say that that's okay for women to be abused and terrorized within their home? That's the root. Because if I'm walking all that way so that I can commiserate or build or get some solace or laugh or just have some communication with my friend because I'm avoiding being at home because I'm afraid, that actually is really the root. That's actually the root challenge.
Crazy. So I guess there are some.
So
yeah, I'm listening.
Yeah, there are questions actually. All right, before we go on, I wanted to ask, Boyuan said something about the framework you use, the D4d framework, and she said that was number 4. Like, how many phases does that framework have? Can you share, just give us like a bit, as much as you can, about your D4d framework, so we can just, yeah.
Yeah, so Jahan mentioned it in the beginning. I'll have her just repeat
Hello?
those questions again, but we'll do them with like in the order of them. So there are 5 phases. And so again, think about it as 5 principles of work and then 5 tools, if you will, around a framework.
All right, thank you.
Jahan, do you want to go through those questions again?
Yeah, so the first thing to look at is interdependent teams. And it's really like, let's look at our team. Who's on our team? Who's not on our team? Like, who are we? And also, what are the multiple identities that we are all bringing to the table? So there's like core questions, right, for each phase. And within each phase, there are tools, but we're not going to go into all that. We're just going to give you the core questions. So the core question would be, how do the identities within your team influence and impact your design decisions together? So if you have a bunch of folks in your team and folks are coming, you know, with different languages, different tribes, different parts of the city, different parts of the country where you grew up, like how do all these things influence how you design together? And then the other phase is equity ideation, and it's starting to think about, okay, what are we creating and who might we be excluding? Because a lot of times we're thinking about our target, like we're thinking about who we're trying to reach. We're clear on who we're trying to reach, but we don't think about, well, who are we excluding, right? And then the third phase is intention versus impact. So that's when we really start separating our intention from our impact. Okay, our intention is to create this amazing blah, blah, blah. But what could be the worst case scenario of what we're creating and on whom? You know, what could go wrong? What are some unintended negative potential impacts of what we're creating? And then the 4th and 5th phase are all about how we're working with the communities that are most impacted. So the 4th phase is the source community. And Boyuan spoke about that a little earlier. We refer to that as the source. The women in the water pump story, they're the source. You know, they're the experts. So how are we engaging them in our design process? And then the last phase is equitable partnerships. And that's based on, is what we're building, is that being dictated or informed by that community, like ongoing? So even if we had one conversation with these women in the beginning, and all we did was, as we were moving along in building what we were building, had designed into our process checkpoints to have conversations with them and say, hey, how does this feel to you? Is this aligned with what you need? Do you have questions? What would you do differently? What are some opportunities? They would have cut us off so fast. We wouldn't even have been able to get so far to making the thing. It would have been like, okay, wait a minute, right? Even if we did the least, and that's what we did, it would have made it, that would make a huge difference.
I think you smashed it.
But thank you so much. We have questions, actually. We have questions pouring in from different places. So I hope we're not going to be repeating some of the things you've already said. And please pardon us if we happen to, but I'm just going to ask the questions as they appear.
Yeah.
Right. So one of the questions from the YouTube is, how do I identify my assumptions and where I am imposing my viewpoints? So yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and
there's
then,
so many.
I think another,
yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah. And then another question I think is similar is, how do we start realizing our biases and defaults? So I think they can go hand in hand. Yeah.
Yeah. So everything that Jahan said are ways, if you just ask those questions at that level alone, you're going to be able to illuminate some of those things, right? So design for diversity isn't just, we ask those 5 questions and we're done, right? Like each part of those phases has a whole process within itself, which sounds very meta. But at the very least, you can start asking these things in the beginning of each of these phases of the design process, because we don't know what your cultural defaults are, especially in a culture that is not our own. So that's something that individual designers can investigate by asking.
Yeah. And I think it's quite important that you mentioned that, because the way we take processes these days is like, okay, I followed the process. Yeah, I'm done. I did my job. I've done my process. Haha, I ticked it off. But processes they need to be understood for the particular cases, because something worked here doesn't mean it worked exactly the same way in another scenario. So yeah. All right. Another question is, okay, it says, for people who work in companies running with a fixed mindset already, like I'm an employee here, how can we evangelize D4d to leadership?
Man, I don't even know where to begin with that one. It depends on the scenario, right? If like your company is, I don't know, completely resistant to change and doesn't understand the need for cultural diversity, then you might not be able to change their mind. You know, it's like the work that we do isn't about convincing people or changing their minds. It's about people who are ready to adopt ways to work better. They already come to us wanting to adopt new ways of working that improves their practice. And that has to be the starting point, because if that's not present, then you ain't gonna do nothing. Like, it's just not gonna really make that big of a difference. However, if you do see an inroad to making some small shifts, even at the team level, we have some resources that, you know, we'll just drive people to our website, www.projectinkblot.com. We have some resources. We have a whole article that we wrote about the process of design for diversity. Sometimes folks have shared that with their entire team, and then there's an interest, and then there are ways for us to support those individuals inside of those companies to affect change. But yeah, it's really case by case.
So you've never really had situations where people were kind of resistant to what you were bringing to them?
Everybody's resistant. Nobody wants to change. So yes, we deal with resistance every day. But Jahan, did you want to?
Yeah, I try to move my family from group texting to WhatsApp. That was like a whole thing. Okay. It was like, I was like, oh my gosh, it's taking so long. You know what I mean? So like, we're just going to be resistant to change anyway. Humans, we're just resistant to change, right? So yeah, of course, people are definitely going to be resistant. But I think what is useful in opening the door is that we actually want people to win. Like, we want you to create great products. We want you to create great services and great content. Our stance is that you can't do that if you're not designing for diversity, or it actually makes it much harder. I would say also that the questions folks ask that comes up a lot is like, well, how do I start to surface these defaults? Which is like a really honest, great question, because you don't know what you don't know. And part of that is we have a very in-depth design thinking exercise we do around this. But if you were just starting very basic, you and your team, you do this with a team, because it doesn't work when you're doing it alone, because I alone am only going to see certain things. If we were doing this, all of us right here, y'all would show me so many other things that I can't see, where we just actually start to map out with our team, like, what are our cultural defaults around this, right? It could be like, what are our cultural defaults around the way that we lead our meetings internally, our team meetings? And we'll start to see, there'll be like patterns. Oh, this person leads the most. The more introverted people don't speak as much. I'm just making this up, but like, you'll start to see, or maybe like, oh, well, actually the men tend to lead the meetings more. We don't have a debrief process. We just rush into the work. We don't take a moment to check in as like a human for a second before we do the work. Like, all these things will pop up. And that's a way to start having a conversation. And you start to kind of map, you'll start to see patterns. Because part of the challenge is that we don't have language around this. And people are afraid to say like, hey, I think you're racist. I think you're biased. I think that was blah, blah, blah. But if we start saying, let's just take a moment as a team, let's take 10 minutes to start mapping out cultural defaults, you will start to see things that you can't see. And you can do that when you're building a product, when you're in the ideation phase, let's say you're creating a campaign, you know, you're starting to think about creative for it. Oh, what are the cultural defaults and how we're casting this marketing campaign, or et cetera, et cetera.
Mm-hmm. Right. So it's not something that is so far-fetched like a lot of people like to make it seem like, oh, to start designing this way, it has to be one huge project. It's really just about intentionality and being willing to make things as diverse as possible. Yeah,
Yeah,
thank
'cause it's
you.
like, yeah, and also, sorry, John, we're like killing that example you gave, but also the water pump. If you
I
were
have
mapping
another example.
if you were mapping out those defaults, you're mapping out your assumptions, right? The default is that they don't like taking walks. The default is that I'm making this up. There are only men on our team. The default, like, you know what I mean? You'll start to see patterns, and it can be very in depth. We're really going in depth and spending an hour doing a complex design thinking activity. We're going to get a strategy, like all of that. But you can start there.
All right. Someone asked specifically, says, please, can you give us an actual example of when you worked on something and how it went, issues you had, and how you solved for it? People are like really bent on having a story. Like, so I don't know, do you have one that really stands out for you that you can share like on the go right now?
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you want to go back to the brief and just talk
yeah,
about
like, okay, so the brief process with this ad agency, right? It's like we led a training. The strategists on the team, part of the training is discovery based. They start to pull out what are areas that we could start to redesign. The strategists were like, we need to redesign our brief process, right? Because they started to see this is an area where cultural defaults will come in like that. It will happen so fast, we won't even be aware of it. So what they started to do was put in checkpoints, right? And they started to build on that. So for example, part of the strategists that worked on these campaigns were like, okay, we're gonna take intent versus impact as a phase of D4d, and we're gonna insert that at this point in the brief. That means that the team will come together. There's an activity that we're gonna go through to start looking at what is the intention, where could this go wrong? And they actually decided we're gonna make this a part of our communication to the client. So we're gonna make sure that when we're sending this brief off to the client, there's a section of it where we actually put in, here's the intention of what y'all are putting forth. Here are all the ways that this could go bad. Because they knew the client is not thinking about this. They're not thinking about this at all. And there were things about their process that were great, like they worked, they were really good. But then there were other things where they were like, if we're not intentional about this, then nothing's going to shift. So they started to work that into how they were working together, like as a team. As a team, they had a process. Oh, at this point in the month, we meet with creative. We exchange ideas. We come back together to think about how we're going to build. Okay, so then here are critical questions that we asked here. Did we review cultural defaults here? Did we do this here, right? There are all these ways that you can start to redesign your process. Another example is we had built a program. This was another program for women entrepreneurs. And part of that was, okay, there was media, right, that was going to be created around women of color, low-income women, immigrant women, entrepreneurs. So part of the way we designed for that was like, okay, so who's shooting this? Who's the photographer? Who's the director? Do they also come from these communities? Okay, now we're going to outsource. We're going to bring these women in. They're telling their own stories. Their stories are not being told for them. We're going to make sure that the social media strategy, how that's designed, brings in actual women entrepreneurs. And this whole program was built around the very specific needs and challenges that they were experiencing, that they wanted actual value, exchange for. And it doesn't always go smoothly if someone's asking the challenges. You're going to get pushback. We built a program where it was like, oh, one of the speakers you're bringing in for this program, they're a little bit, it was a little bit like risque. It's like a Black woman with a trans son. It was like, oh, I don't think that's going to fly. That ended up being the most popular workshop as part of the curriculum design. Because it was like, oh, this person's speaking authentically. They're bringing a fresh perspective. It's not the same stuff we see all the time at these conferences.
All right. I want to drop something. So another, I was thinking about intent and impact. So I thought about something that the impact and the intent, they all went wrong. I'm bringing it back to Nigeria, actually Lagos. So normally, default, yeah. Normally, we 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 live in a community type of setting. We live in compounds. We live in like community, like it's a community thing for, I don't want to say Africans, but Nigerians. Like then, it was really a community thing. So some guys came over, the white guys. I don't know if that's offensive. Is that offensive? Saying the white guys? Nope. All right. So the white guys came over.
Maybe we're not the right people to answer that question, though. So
yeah. So the white guys came over and started building 4 corner houses. Not 4 per se, but they started building westernized houses to like block us, like keep us in boxes. Like okay. So doing this, there were spillovers, right? Some people were started living on the streets. Some people couldn't afford these 4 corner houses. Some people tried to like design a way for their living, like in the sea, they have like wooden houses and all those things just so they could live, right? So I think they just disrupted our default, right? I think I'm right. Yeah. And I think as you go on in history, that we started taking up the mannerisms. We started taking up, okay, how they do things, how they design things. So if it's not this way, then okay, nah, it's wrong. Maybe like okay, if it's
Basically
fun, it's not.
distorting the cultural instincts,
Yeah.
like what we're used to, what is normal. The family setting is just kind of turned heads over. It's like, okay, you guys, this is a better way to go about this. We know what works for us. This is how it works for us. And then it's just like lifting something that worked. It probably most likely worked where it was. And it was just like placed exactly like right there. And it has kind of affected a lot of other things because it's messed up with the family settings and a whole lot of other things. And I think that's a really good example because it goes on to impact, like it may not be so obvious actually, like it might not be so obvious how those changes were made. It feels like, oh, it's technological advancement, but it has actually changed up some of those dynamics.
Yeah. Also, if we're looking at the human-centered design, right? We tend to look at, okay, who's the human we're talking about, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, is it the people that actually use this thing? Or so we think about how did Uber create an application? I want to make an application like Uber. So the human that Uber solved the problems were taking the what do I call it now? I don't know what I'm going to call it, but the human in that sense is not, I don't want to say African, but it's not African. I think it's white.
Yeah, probably. I mean, I don't know the origins of Uber. We could probably find that out really quickly. But yeah, that's the whole point, right? Is that cultural defaults in and of themselves are not bad. They're not wrong. But when that becomes the only point of view that design decisions are made off of, then the intention and the impact are always going to be different. Because if Uber is saying we're going to we're going to hit all these global markets, and the human that they're designing for is a rich white man from Silicon Valley in America, right? Who has a certain income and blah, 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 all that kind of stuff. Then we see what the problem is now. We see how they scaled so quickly, you know, fail fast, break things, scaled so quickly. And then now they're dealing with the repercussions of it and have been dealing with it. And what we're saying is that that can be avoided. That can just be avoided. That is not the only measure of success. And to both of y'all's points, it's like there are certain things that are native to our cultures that are sacred, that have been working. And though there may be defaults also and things to examine, there are things that using cultural strategy, we can see, is it working? And if we go to the source and the source says, yeah, we want to maintain this cultural norm because this is actually working for us, then it's our responsibility as designers to listen to that, right? So going back to like, who are we as designers? It's not that, you know, it's interesting what you said, John. You're like, well, they interrupted our cultural default. But the thing is, like, their cultural default was imposed on you, right? Without permission, without consent, really. And that's a really big piece of the Design for Diversity framework, is this idea of mutual beneficiality, this idea of consent, this idea of the source wants this solution. So we have now agreed upon this is the right solution to build upon. And we're going to do that now.
That's nice. I think we smashed this topic. I don't know what you guys feel, but I feel we smashed it.
Yeah, there's so much to, it's so deep. I mean, I think that like, it reminds me of there's so many examples of it, but there's this TED Talk by Wynn and I like, this dude named Ernest Ciroli, Italian guy, and talks about when he was like, you know, younger, when he was like 19, he was working at a nonprofit, and it was an Italian nonprofit working in Zambia. And long story short, he went to the community and was like, you have, you know, amazing agriculture, you should grow tomatoes. And he's like, we came to teach the Zambian people how to grow tomatoes, and the tomatoes grew so big and it was so amazing. And then like, they're like, okay. And then like 2 days later, like these hippos come out of the water and eat all the tomatoes, you know? And he's like, why didn't you tell us? And they were like, you never asked, because you never asked, you know? So there's something with humans, there's something with this imperialist, colonialist mentality that has us not ask. It has us assume that we are the expert. We know what's best. We don't need to go. We don't have time to do that. We're ready to go. We're just going to jump right into it and start building solutions. And it's like, that is such a critical point to intercept and to intervene and to ask, like, why am I doing that? And what is the benefit of me actually going to the folks who are most impacted? What does an actual authentic relationship look like that I can start building? And why am I viewing these folks not as experts, not as having the solutions to their own challenges that they're experiencing already? So that's something that's deeper. That's a whole other conversation, but we want to interrupt that.
Yeah, but like I said, if we keep on talking, we'll go on for hours, and about 5 minutes to the end. So I just want to ask you guys another question. Besides working,
I also have another question.
Diversity, inclusion, equity. What do you guys do for fun? Do you guys listen to rap music? Do you guys play something? What do you guys do?
We love to talk lots of, sorry if I'm gonna cuss, but we like to talk shit about TV shows that we think are terrible. And, and good ones. So we're like amateur movie critics, if you will. So that brings us a lot of joy. What else? I love to go swimming. I'm also an artist. I do like collage art, and I also make jewelry for fun. Yeah, Jahan.
I love reading. Big book nerd. Yeah, also love watching some good shows. Love dancing, though that has not been happening a lot because of COVID. I really miss like out dancing. And yeah, like spending time with family and friends and all that. But Wen and I are currently obsessed with the show I May Destroy You. It's on HBO, and it is really, 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 really good.
I may destroy you.
Yeah. So we're music and culture kind of people.
Oh, cool.
Okay, that's true. Well,
No, I feel too serious because my question feels serious suddenly after we had such a light break. Well, I feel like I should just ask it. So what do you think about, like, do you think the term minority really affects, like, the need to see why we need to design for a variety of cultures? Is it because, okay, like, there are not so many of them after all, so what's the point of having to consider these people? Do you think that term minority is something that is being misused?
Yeah, we don't understand that term because I don't know about you, but I'm not a minority. There are a lot of Chinese people in this world. What? Okay, my cat's trying to destroy me. And same thing with Black folks, right? I mean, you know, it's like, look at how many Nigerians there are. Look at the diaspora. Like, it makes no sense that any of us would be minorities. So that language is insidious, and it's also by design. So we just want to mention that because we do not use that language. We talk about being from misrepresented communities because somebody else, AKA people with no color, or however you said that, imposed what our identities are on us. And so we say misrepresented. Jahan, anything else to add to that? I'm sure you have
I mean, this could be a question. There's 2 minutes left, so I'm just going to leave it there. Good question. Is that what y'all say, or like, what do y'all think about that? Like, do you feel comfortable with that language, or?
Yeah, I think using the right words actually give more impact. Like, if you use terms like that, they have like I feel like subconscious effects on the kind of things that you can achieve or you can be. And I feel like it's also something we experience because we might not have some of these more racial issues, but even the language that is used in we see it all around us in the things that we are told that we can do. It's a system that kind of limits us, or we are told that you can't do these things particularly because you are not like this, or this isn't pretty because it is not done this way. Or so yeah, I think the language actually matters a whole lot. I'm really I'm grateful that you mentioned that.
Thanks for that question, whoever asked it. That's good.
All right, okay. My internet, I don't know if it's lagging, but I think
it's not. It's not.
Yeah. But anyways, thank you guys for joining us. This was quite interesting, and thank you guys for watching. So yeah, everybody should design for cultural diversity. There's the framework. There's an article on, I don't know the website, but when I find it, I'll put it on the Asha resources. So
yeah, we can send it to you.
Okay, true. All right.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, it's in the Creative Independent. It's Kickstarter's newsletter thing. Yeah, I'm losing words. Sorry.
All right. So 9:30. Have fun. Stay safe. I don't know how you guys are in these times, but well, I'm chilling. Actually, I'm having fun.
Yeah.
Good to hear.
Yeah.
That's great.
We're just really appreciative. We just want to thank y'all, and thanks to folks who tuned in.